A lot of people are worried about CBDCs, but to me, this is even worse because the government is trying to control your identity, but there is a way out. One of the major themes that I think Nomad Capitalist is about is that within my lifetime and within yours, there's been a dramatic shift in the world. When I was born, the US was the best place to be born, and there wasn't a lot of other competition. Nobody would have thought that living outside of the Western world was the thing to do. And yet that's changed dramatically. We've seen faith in governments in the Western world drop dramatically. You've seen the ability to live in other countries increase dramatically, and the metrics show it. You are less free financially and personally in the US and many other Western countries today than you were when you were born, and yet you can be more free in many other parts of the world. And so when Reason Magazine says that the government wants to control your identity, this is just the latest infraction. And this one's a big one of where Western governments are trying to take advantage of that legacy trust and make it endless trust where they can do whatever they want, including controlling your identity. Reason says, as states continue to implement digital ID systems, it is essential that they build tools in ways that inherently protect civil liberties rather than asking citizens to just trust government officials. The problem is, in your country, too many people do trust the government officials. We've given you statistics throughout the last several years that say in Canada, a lot of people want socialism. A lot of people want civil liberties to go away in countries like the United States. 3 out of 10 people in Gen Z say, put surveillance cameras inside your house that bureaucrats can watch to protect people from domestic violence. There's no more limits in terms of how much surveillance, how much information you can give, how much invasion of your financial and personal privacy can happen in many Western countries. And what I can tell you is, having lived all around the world for a long time now, that is not going to fly in a lot of other countries. But in the US, Reason says, Americans can now ditch their physical wallet in many states and verify their identity simply by tapping a device on a scanner. You can see where this is going. And just as digital wallets from Apple and Google have made commerce more convenient, digital ID systems could potentially make government interactions faster and more efficient. But they also raise the ominous specter of government surveillance. Can we have the efficiency of digital ID without letting government track our every move? But that's not the path we're on. 20-some years ago, after 9/11, as a kid, I said, you can't do some of the stuff that the US and the Republicans, the supposed people protecting you from the big government, were trying to do. They push stuff through. They give the government a lot more power. And I think people would say a lot of it was used very unfairly. You've seen over the last 20 years just how unfair it's been in that you are spied on and surveilled, and they want to take away a lot of freedoms from you. And guess what? A lot of people still think that's okay because it's for safety, just like it's for the children. Wanting freedom is increasingly out of vogue in the Western world. And yet, if you've only studied the Western world and only know the Western world, you think that's the case everywhere. That's why people say, oh, I'm going to stay and fight in the United States. The CBDCs are coming, the invasion of privacy is coming, there'll be nowhere to run. People cackle at us. Take Colorado, Reason says. Since 2019, Coloradans have been able to use a digital ID as a legal form of personal ID throughout the state. Users download an application to their smartphone, enroll in the service, and have their identity authenticated by taking photos or videos of a valid ID card. Then that information is encrypted, and the user is granted a digital ID, an associated key or code that serves as an identifier. How many times have you heard it's encrypted, by the way, only to find out later something went wrong? Coloradans can simply show their digital ID to verify their identity, much the same way you'd show a driver's license to a bartender to prove you're 2021. But, it goes on, Colorado Digital ID collects troves of information from users. As outlined in their own privacy policy, the app collects data including but not limited to your IP address, device ID, browser type, information on the general geographic area of the user. The privacy policy further details that the government shares information with third-party service providers and, much more concerningly, they say, with law enforcement and other government agencies upon request. It's kind of like in the US, the Bank Secrecy Act says you actually have no secrecy when banking. These privacy policies are basically say, you don't have any privacy. The fundamental flaw, Reason says, in digital ID systems like Colorado's is that they are centralized. In order to work, citizens must trust the government, protect their data from malevolent actors and from the state itself, despite the fact that the government agencies have not been good stewards of citizen data. And that's what happens with these big governments. They don't do a good job, and unlike what happens in the private sector, they get to continue. I mean, what other part of society is, hey, we did a bad job keeping you safe and something bad happened, so now we're going to imply more rules that you have to comply with, and we're going to be in charge of that, even though we screwed up the first time. In the private sector, these people will be fired. In the government, they are promoted. And so now they're taking over and they're moving things over to a digital ID. You have CBDCs for finance. You have these digital IDs for ostensibly, hey, it'll be easier just to scan your ID. By the way, when people say, I'm just going to put all my money in Bitcoin and I'll be totally safe, well, that's great until you want to buy something. And when the government says, hey, no merchants accept Bitcoin, you think Walmart's going to take your Bitcoin? They're going to do whatever the government tells them to do. The same way, you want to go to a bar, they're going to say, yeah, we only accept, ID. I'll tell you what, I go to places, I try and pay in cash in a lot of places. I use a credit card for big stuff, but for everyday purchases, I often use cash. There's a few coffee shops and whatnot, like, oh, we don't take cash. I don't really go there. I don't really like the approach. And so it's good to have options. But what happens when the government starts dictating, oh, hey, bars, you have to accept this new digital ID. People don't have a choice. Do you think the bar is going to push back? No, in fact, most of them, because most people in your country, in the West, are against freedom and don't really give much thought to what's happening. They're going to be in favor of it. And the people at many of these businesses are going to defend it. And they're basically going to be the frontline defenders of government policy. And so you've got centralized systems, which reason says many states claim they will respect the privacy and civil liberties of the citizens. What's been their track record of that? Essentially promising that they will not use their newfound power for evil. Far better than Google's longtime motto, don't be evil, is the idea of can't be evil. It's easier to trust state actors to respect our privacy when they have the lack of ability to violate our privacy. One of the reasons that I talk about going to smaller countries, and I think we ought to respect, by the way, that countries get to operate differently. They don't all have to look like yours, and that going to a country where they don't bother you as much doesn't mean you have something to hide. It just means you don't want to jump through so many hoops. It just means you want to have some privacy. There are plenty of countries out there that either don't have the means, and in many cases, I think, don't really have the desire. There's a difference. For example, we've talked about small countries for many years. When you see the politicians walking down the street, it's a little bit of a different vibe. We interviewed the former president of Georgia, and he said, it's kind of hard to make reforms in a country with 4 million people because when you're in the capital, someone in your administration is going to be seen. People are going to give them an earful. And there's a certain accountability, he says, that comes from being in a small country. I think having residence permits, citizenship in small countries is a good thing. The easiest way for most people to do that is Caribbean citizenship by investment. Nomad Capitalist helps people get that, among many other types of different citizenships you can obtain. I think the biggest country in the Caribbean, population-wise, that offers citizenship by investment has 180,000 people. Tiny little island. It's beautiful. In many cases, tax-free or tax-friendly in the Caribbean. It's the dream of a lot of people to live there. You can be a citizen, live there for as long as you want. You make a donation, you get citizenship in a matter of months. You think that those governments are going around figuring out how to screw their citizens over? When I watched, as a St. Lucian citizen by investment, when I watched the Prime Minister's address on New Year's, we built a road this year. We built a school. That's what they're focused on. And when you look at their citizenship by investment programs, you give them $100,000, you give them $200,000 that goes into their economy. They're actually doing things for the people. There's obviously discussions, as in any political system, of, the other party's doing the wrong stuff. But you actually see low-income housing being built in countries like Dominica. And of course, the big Western powers hate that you can go and get citizenship in peaceful countries that are small and actually have some accountability. They hate that you can remove yourself from their shackles. They want every detail on you. They want your digital ID. They want to control your finances. They don't want to let you leave. That's why during the pandemic, a lot of Americans were complaining it was hard to give up their citizenship. And some of those Americans probably had to pay a lot more taxes than they would have had the government they paid taxes for their entire life been responsive to them. At least in a smaller country, the government generally has to be responsive. And then there are other countries that just don't have the infrastructure. They're developing. They don't really care that much, and people just live laissez-faire lives. But you have big countries, Western countries, arrogant countries that are riding off the fumes of legacy that, 50 years ago, they were the only game in town, and they're like, hey, let's make them have digital ID. We're going to track everything they do. There are some Western countries that are fine, that are smaller countries. We've talked about Ireland, we've talked about Switzerland. The big ones, where many of you are watching from, want unchecked power. And they've gotten away with it for so long, and they're riding off of the fact that you don't think there's any other options. When Americans say, where are you going to go? There's nowhere to go. They're talking about Canada. They're talking about Italy. You look at the entire world, you've got 252 sovereign countries and autonomous jurisdictions. There's somewhere to go. There's somewhere where they don't care. There's somewhere where they don't want to tax you. There's somewhere where they believe in privacy, perhaps because the people demand it, perhaps because they just got out 20 years ago of a situation where things were really screwed up. When I talked to my property manager in Montenegro about paying the bills, there's not some formal process to go to. I owned property in the U.S. Oh my goodness, when I sold the property there, how many surcharges and deductions there were. And meanwhile, in Montenegro, you go to pay the property, it's some guy sitting around at a card table smoking at 2 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. He takes your cash and you're done. You get a little receipt on a piece of paper. Maybe there's a benefit to living in a place where things are a bit more informal. And so the Reason article, you should read this. It goes on and on about how this kind of digital ID is a problem. I'm all for convenience, but I think people should have the option. I want to go to a place where if I want to pay with my credit card and get my miles, I can do that. If I want to pay with cash, I can. There's a lot less of a war on cash in many parts of the world than there is in the West right now. It's all about you having the freedom to live in a place where the police are on your side. I talked to a lot of Americans, even who are very pro-police for their entire life, like, it's kind of getting out of hand. I feel not so safe. I recently flew through Heathrow Airport. It was a different feeling than the places that I go to. And so even if you want to stay living in your country, I want you to have a residence permit and ideally a citizenship in a country that just is laissez-faire because it's small. Maybe they don't want to bother people. Their biggest concern is, hey, we got to build a new school. We got to build a new road. We got to build low-income housing. And if you're just saying, I live in the U.S. and I'm comparing this to Canada and the U.K., you're looking at it wrong. You want a place where this digital ID isn't even on the radar. That's what you want as part of your diversification. Whether you're going to move there now, that's what I did many, many years ago. I saw the rise. I saw all the changes coming, and I've been telling you about it for years. During the pandemic, a lot of people woke up and saw, not sure I can trust the government. They're not on my side. Being a citizen is more of a responsibility in some cases than it is a privilege that's supposed to be this great club membership that they told me it is. And I really think having residence or citizenship somewhere that is very different than where you're from is valuable. Nomad Capitalist has helped people get citizenship in close to 36 different countries, open bank accounts in close to 40 countries, incorporate, move to, do everything all around the world. And when I meet up with people at our live events, at our client dinners, they say, I can't imagine. I couldn't have imagined that it would be this free. I couldn't have imagined that it would get to the point where I needed this stuff, and I can't imagine the different feeling by going to somewhere maybe I never thought I would move or bank or do business. You can have that same freedom. Go to nomadcapitalist.com, learn how we help people. This is my life, and I feel a lot more free than a lot of folks I talk to in the United States these days, and it's because of stories like this.